Hi everyone. So this is a slightly unusual video for me in that it is a non-fiction video and a non-fiction book specifically which does not particularly have anything to do with literature, or certainly not anything to do with contemporary or English literature. So this is a video about Mary Beard's book, Women and Power. So Mary Beard, for those who don't know, is a Cambridge academic in the UK, and she is an expert she's a classics professor, so she's an expert on ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And I read this book because it was recommended by a friend with a strong interest in feminist writing, so a colleague, a senior female colleague, and she highly recommended it. I've had it on my reading list for a while. I haven't got to it because it never seemed like the right moment, but I was looking for something to read last night, Friday night, sitting at home on my own. I didn't want to read demanding fiction. I wanted to read something relatively straightforward, something non-fiction, and this was the piece that came to hand. Now, I have written elsewhere, and I will add the link below, about how slow I have been to come to feminist writing of any period. It wasn't something I studied at any stage, and for a long time I felt that it wasn't something that I needed because I seemed to be doing just fine in getting on with my career. It is as I have become older and as I have become more senior that I've realised that actually a lot of this stuff is relevant to me rather than relevant just theoretically. As the friend I was talking to about this the other day said, the point about the glass ceiling is that you can't see it's there until you hit it. And I think what both of us agreed was that until we were in our 30s, we didn't believe this would be directly relevant to us, and then suddenly we found that our heads had banged against the glass ceiling without us ever expecting it to happen. So I have discovered there is a glass ceiling after all. Arguably I was quite arrogant in assuming that this thing which other people told me was the case was somehow not going to apply to me. It does apply to me. Anyway, I read Mary Beard's Women and Power last night. It's called Women and Power, a Manifesto. It's a relatively short book. It is a book based on 2 lectures which Beard gave in 2014 and 2017, and so it's at a relatively high level. These were pieces of writing that were meant to be read aloud and heard. They are not super tightly argued academic pieces of writing, and they are all the more accessible for that. They are nonetheless academically rigorous in the sense that Beard brings her extraordinarily deep and wide-ranging knowledge of the ancient world to bear on the modern world. And she is also, in the UK, one of the most vocal female grey-haired experts seen in the media and on social media. So she also brings her experience of what it is like to be I don't know her exact age, but a mature woman, I hope that's not offensive, who is dealing with these questions of female authority and the authority of the female voice and power as it relates to that on a daily basis. And the book is fascinating in its combination of anecdotes from ancient Greece and ancient Rome about the ways in which women were perceived and the ways in which women in power and women's voices were perceived, and how this still plays out in the modern Western world. The underlying argument is that as Western culture is based on ancient Greece and ancient Rome to a great extent, so the ways in which women's voices were perceived and women in power were perceived in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome are still the ways in which they're perceived today. And that is for me, was a compelling argument. Beard argues it mostly through individual images which are still used today. The most relevant of those, I suppose, being the way that the myth of Perseus and Medusa was used by Trump supporters to present a beheaded image of Clinton, a hugely misogynistic beheaded image of Clinton, and it is a book which seeks to provoke and bring attention to the way these images are used rather than to provide solutions. So if I have a criticism of this book, it is that it only very generally, at a very high level, sketches towards the end some ways of dealing with this situation rather than acknowledging the situation. It's not aiming to provide solutions. That was not the intention of the lecture format. And what it does do very clearly is demonstrate that, for example, women's feeble, high, weak voices were seen as very negative in ancient Rome and in ancient Greece, and they are today as well. And it's done primarily through anecdote. So there are the ways in which specific classical myths and specific classical idioms are used in the modern Western world to disparage female politicians and other women who are highly visible and in power. But also she looks at the ways in which certain powerful modern women have tried to adapt themselves to what in ancient Greece and Rome were described as the standard male ways of doing things, male being by definition what power looked like. So she uses the example of Margaret Thatcher, who very deliberately trained her voice to sound more masculine and a much deeper voice. If I try, I can do my Margaret Thatcher voice, but deliberately did that in order to come across as sounding like someone who was used to power. She talks about Angela Merkel and about Clinton and the way that they dress and the things that, as a powerful senior woman, you automatically do to make yourself in some ways appear closer to the standard vision of power, which is by definition a masculine feature of power. And to me, this was highly recognisable. There is nothing new here. What I think is valuable here and what I enjoyed about this book, or found useful about this book, was the clarity with which its ideas are presented, the clarity with which she says, look, this is what it was like in the 1st century AD, this is what it's like in 2018 or 2017 when the lectures were written. Look at these parallels. This is not something that has to be innate to humanity. This is something which we as a Western culture have learned and which is still relevant to us over time. She doesn't overplay her hand. She doesn't claim that everything in Western culture is being drawn from these Greco-Roman precedents, but she does show very clearly that those are there. And so it's a quick read. It's a small book. It's a thin book. It's a short book. I read it over the course of, I don't know, an hour or so last night. I came away from it feeling angry, which I think is probably helpful, being reminded again of some of the things I would prefer to deny or live in denial of, about how difficult it is for women to be seen as equally powerful even when we are in positions of power. The standard example being the board meeting in which a woman is told, that's a really great idea, now could we hear it from a man please, so we can take some notice of it. But it is a powerful book. It claims to be a manifesto. I'm not sure I would go so far as to say it's a manifesto, though I think that's a great sales pitch. But it is a book you should read if you want a relatively quick but still rigorous and very thought-provoking view from someone who not only has a vast expertise in how this played out in classical times, but who is also dealing with this on a day-to-day basis in 2018 as a highly visible, mature woman with a powerful voice. So, Mary Beard, Women and Power, a Manifesto. It is not a book that changed my life, but it is a book which I will remember and which I will go back to, and I will try again to live up to some of the things it says about continuing to have a strong female voice, even when sometimes it's tempting to do the Margaret Thatcher voice in order to appear more masculine. So there we are. You get to know that I can put my voice at different pitches, and I recommend this book as one you might want to read.